I often tell teachers that the biggest mistake they make is assuming their students are interested in what they have to say. All teaching is about is really seduction. The great thing about science is we can be wrong. Being wrong is what progress is all about. Lack of religion is now equated with lack of morality, with not being good. And most people, they claim to be religious because it makes them feel good about themselves. Who would want to live forever? Eternity is a long time, especially near the end. You can't separate science and culture. That science is part of our culture, and it does what art, music, and literature do. It causes us to reassess our place in the cosmos.
What does this discovery of gravitational waves, what does it really mean to us?
This is a brand new window. It's the astronomy of the 21st century. One of the new brands we've created things called dialogues, and just like we're having now, people I think are interested in conversations. Anyone could talk about creativity and madness. It would be Johnny, and people will be surprised because he's a very thoughtful, literate man. As a theoretical physicist, the two states that are best to be in are wrong and confused. And I'm both a lot of the time.
Upgrade your peer group Lawrence Krauss style and join us on the London Real Business Accelerator program. It's 8 weeks. We turn your idea into a product and into a business through 2 hours of live calls with myself and the team every week. We keep you accountable to finally make those changes and really get your business off the ground. Please submit your application by clicking the link below or go to londonrealacademy.com/biz, that's B-I-Z. I read every application personally, and I look forward to accepting you into our inner circle. It's not often I get to interview someone who will be interviewing the actor Johnny Depp in a few weeks' time, but Lawrence Krauss isn't your regular cosmologist and physicist. He's a rare breed because he brings science to the masses in a way that they get excited about. He wrote a book called The Physics of Star Trek, and he really knows how to bring things home. You might have also seen him in the Werner Herzog movie, The Unbelievers, where he and Richard Dawkins toured the world talking about religion. Does it have any place? Talking about atheism, taking on people in the Catholic Church, of the Muslim faith. And I love to have this conversation. I think we need to have it more. And Lawrence is a fascinating man when it comes to talking about these issues, knowing the science. He went even further and talked about gravitational waves and a lot of theory of relativity and even the entire universe and how that ties into who we are as human beings. So it's quite a packed episode as far as the topics we covered, and he is just a really fascinating guy with some amazing shoes, as you will be able to see. His shoe game is stronger than mine in this episode, but it was a real pleasure sitting down with Lawrence. You know, a lot of people ask me, Brian, what is London Real really about? Well, it's not just videos on YouTube with fabulous people around the world sharing their insights with you. We like to take it a little bit further, and we have a group of over 1,000 people worldwide in our academy, and we get together in person in cities around the world at our summit meeting here in London, and we push each other to really be the best version of ourselves. And I believe that as humans and as members of this society, we owe it to everyone around us to be the best and to stop playing small and to risk it and put something on the line and just effing do it. And that's what we really do behind the scenes, and here's a little bit more about that.
The entrepreneurial journey, it can be a lonely road. I push myself in so many areas, but you know, you can't do it all yourself.
The thing about the academy is, it's like, look, you have the ideas, you have the ability, you have the skill, and you have the sort of ambition for yourself. But when you have a group of people pulling you forward, it's so important.
Accountability is what's missing from most of the programs or any gurus or any internet mentor that I had before.
I wanted to get some accountability. I wanted to make myself accountable to a group, to you.
The reason we started the Academy is because I felt like we were doing these amazing talks, like we'd have a Peter Sage episode or a Dan Pena episode or a Kala or someone, and you get super inspired, and then YouTube stops, and then you go back to your life and you don't make any changes. And it was just like, it felt like, what are we doing? If you're designing your life right, the good times are now. And in a few years, you'll look back and say, wow, that was amazing.
The thing about the Academy is it has so many different sort of layers to it. I think your web seminars are awesome. The way you broke it down and the style of your teaching is pretty awesome.
I like the feed. When I have to motivate myself, I kind of look at others struggling and getting over those struggles. So I actually follow daily the feed.
Best feature would be the sort of Facebook aspect of it, the social media aspect of it, as in creating a profile with your goals, your dreams.
Everyone's on the same vibe, and we may be at different stages in our journeys, but everyone's on the same page at the end of the day. Everyone's really trying to push themselves and building the best you. It really resonates with me.
And the fact that I'm committing a small amount of money and the fact that I'm actually trying to interact with those people means that I'm invested and means that I will keep it for the long run.
You have to be serious about yourself and what you want to achieve. And if you're serious about yourself, this is going to be such a fantastic platform.
London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Lawrence Krauss, who is a theoretical physicist, cosmologist, science and public policy advocate, best-selling author, and actor. You've written over 300 scientific publications and 9 books, including the bestsellers The Physics of Star Trek and A Universe from Nothing. Your new book is The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far. When you're not a scientist, you're in showbiz. You executive produced The Unbelievers, a documentary film that discusses science and reason. You've appeared with the Cleveland Symphony, been nominated for a Grammy, and most recently acted in a film by Werner Herzog. Your fans include Johnny Depp, Miley Cyrus, Richard Dawkins. Lawrence, welcome to London Real.
Gee, it sounds so good.
Right? I might actually just start doing that as a living.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell me how a guy gets from Cambridge, Massachusetts, MIT, 1982, graduates with a Ph.D., to now being, going to a theater later tonight, sold out crowd. You're basically like me. You're now in the media business, and I was there 11 years after you, graduated mechanical engineering in 93.
That makes me feel old. Okay.
It does, right? And it's funny, my dad graduated Caltech in 65. He actually took a class from Feynman when he was there. And he said, Brian, when I go to my class reunions, nobody's doing the same thing they studied. And
well, I think that's really important. I think most people, what I tell students, even the ones who go on in a career in science in the same trajectory they started, that most of what you learn after even after a PhD. As a physicist, most of the things I know I learned after my PhD. I think, and that's the point, if education is good, is to make you a lifelong learner. And if life is interesting, you shouldn't be doing the same things. Even if it's the same field, you should be trying to find new things to do. I didn't have a trajectory that I planned from, well, actually, the trajectory I planned, I learned how to juggle because I thought I wouldn't get a job when I got my Ph.D. from MIT in physics. There were no jobs. So I thought I knew how to drive. I figured I could either drive, taxi, or juggle. And those were the backup plans. And the rest wasn't planned. I'm not very strategic, or at least I've never been strategic. Up to now, I'm trying to be a little more, because life has a lot of demands on me right now. But I really took opportunities as they arose and planted a lot of seeds. So it was just following my own interests, because what I also tell people, scientists aren't trying to save the world in general. They're just doing what they enjoy. And so I've always been doing what I enjoy, but I like to try and tailor it to something that I think is also useful. And I didn't plan for any of this, actually. I think I always had interest in communicating to the public. I was always gregarious and outgoing, and I worked at a science museum when I was a kid and things like that. But I don't think I necessarily planned that. But part of it is that I got interested in science because of people like Feynman and other people who'd written about science and who'd performed it in one way or another. And I think to some extent it was returning the favor when I started to do that. I also think it's probably just laziness, that if I didn't do a lot of different things, I wouldn't do anything.
What are your memories of MIT?
Well, you black out a lot of the bad ones. The thing I liked about MIT, and I really noticed it when I moved to Harvard after MIT, was the unity. There's that big main hallway in the building, and I would know almost everything that was going on campus from the time I walked in the door at Mass Ave to all the way to my office. So I'd know everything that was going on campus. When I went to Harvard, I really didn't know what was going on except what was going on in physics. So I like that unity, and I like the no-nonsense atmosphere. Day or night, the building was open, and that. But graduate school wasn't fun in any way that I could describe. Boston's a great place to be a student, as you know. Although
I'm not a student at MIT.
Well, in fact, interestingly, I taught some undergrads when I was a graduate student, because I liked to teach, and they had me teach. But I remember teaching a junior, a third-year student, who was so proud of the fact that he and his friend had never been off the MIT campus in the 3 years that they'd been in Boston. This incredible city, and he was so proud that he'd never left campus. So that's MIT.
Yeah, that is MIT. When people ask me what Boston's like, I'm like, I didn't know, because they worked us pretty hard. And so I remember 24-hour libraries.
Yeah.
I remember when you walk in, it's called Lobby 7, the big lobby on Massachusetts Avenue. And I remember looking up at the ceiling, and it's this beautiful lobby.
Yeah.
And I just remember every time it kind of caught my heart.
Yeah, me too. Every time I
years.
walked in, I remember the first time I walked in the building when I got accepted to graduate school, and I came from Canada, and I drove there, and it was something. It was really unbelievable. And then every time I walked in, it was very special. I love that aspect of the building. But Boston's a great town. But I was fortunate. Graduate school is a little less intense than undergraduate. But nevertheless, I think if it hadn't been for the blizzard of '78, which was a huge blizzard, I think I might not have got my degree, because they have Ph.D. written exams, many of them, and I didn't take any courses. One of the nice things about MIT and the graduate program in physics anyway is that you don't actually have to take any courses. You just have to pass these qualifying exams and then go on and do research. And I opted to, for some reason or other, not take them and try and teach myself. But the blizzard happened, and there was absolutely nothing to do. The whole state was closed for 9 days. I remember cross-country skiing across the Charles River into downtown Boston, my place, and I remember going to the undergraduate dormitories to try and find food. But as much as I would try and find something to distract me from studying, there was nothing. And so I think that's the only reason I passed.
Those are great tales, and I remember I have selective memory too, so I'm sure I blocked out all the bad stuff.
Yeah,
and there was some bad stuff.
But it's a great it's an interesting school, and it's intense, but it's a great city. There are 62 colleges and universities in Boston with 500,000 students. So, I came from in Canada, a place where there were only 2 people to graduate in physics and math when I was there. So it was quite a change. It was quite a wake-up call, and it was hard to leave Boston. I don't know if you found it this way. When as an academic anyway, and then I moved to Harvard, it was very difficult to leave. I felt like it was the center of the universe. And when I moved down the road to Yale to teach there, I still kept a position one day a week because I had to cut the umbilical cord slowly because Boston seemed like the center of everything.
Right, I guess it is the center of knowledge in that way.
Well, it certainly seems like it, yeah. There are, you realize you can do things other places, but it was, it draws you in. And yeah, for American cities, Boston's still one of my favorites, in spite of the fact that the driving there, as you know, is miserable. And it ruined me for the rest of my life. I'm an awful driver, and I claim that it's because of Boston.
Because of Boston. Yeah, no, I treasure the days I was there. I felt like I was really around a real elite group of people in a place with so much history. And in America, there's not many buildings or universities that are that old, and you go there, and I was, yeah.
Well, that hits a point that's interesting, because I remember when I first went there, I got involved. I've always been political, but I got involved in the graduate student council for some reason that I have no idea why I did. But early on, the first day when you're a graduate student, there was some orientation, and then the president of the graduate student council came and spoke and said something really interesting, because he said, so you all felt like hot shit before you, and I can use that word, I hope, on your program, yes. But because there are all these kids who are the best in their classes or whatever and come to graduate school, and then they suddenly feel worthless. And he said, you're going to feel worthless and incompetent for the next 4 years, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. After you graduate, it'll be okay again. And that was really the experience of coming in and feeling good about yourself, and then beginning to feel bad about yourself for 4 or 5 years until you got out. And so it's a hard time.
One of my buddies who actually lives in Portland now, and he teaches cooking, was an aeroastro engineer there. And I saw him a few years ago, and he said, Brian, he said, what I realized about MIT is it's a game. And he was like, you knew how to play the game, and that means you just have to be methodical, you have to put the work in, you have to balance your social life, because you put all the great minds there, and then all their egos get crushed those first few months, and they're like, wait, I'm not the smartest guy in the class anymore. And then you have to just deal with it, put a process in, because it's very challenging. So many things to talk to you about, but we were talking earlier how you're going to wear these beautiful shoes when you're going to be interviewing Johnny Depp soon. A dialogue with Johnny Depp. Because there's so many things I could ask you about that. Why are you two talking, and why are thousands and thousands of people going to show up to watch you talk?
Well, they're going to show up because Johnny's there, probably. But as I was telling you earlier, I'm very happy that we built this program, my Origins Project, which looks at everything from the origins of the universe to the origins of consciousness. And we run high-level scientific meetings with the best people in the world on different forefront topics that are interdisciplinary. But we always have a public component where we have panels or discussions, and because we built up a brand, we get 3,000 people regularly coming to pay to come to our programs, and I'm just very proud of that, as proud of that as anything I've done at Arizona. But science and culture are intertwined, and one of the new brands we've created beyond these panels is things called dialogues, and just like we're having now, people I think are interested in conversations between people that for one reason or another they think are interesting, and so we started last year. My first one was with Alan Alda, an actor who's also interested in science, and we call, I think, Science and Culture, Long Lost Lovers. And we did it at a beautiful location, actually, in that case, downtown in Phoenix. And then Noam Chomsky, and Johnny is going to surprise people. We're actually having a workshop. Again, the National Institutes of Health asked me to organize it on pattern processing in the brain and computers exploring creativity and madness. And it's a fascinating topic, and it ought to be a fascinating meeting. And I thought, well, how could we complement that with a public event? And Johnny and I were talking, and I thought if anyone could talk about creativity and madness, both from his work and the people he knows, it would be Johnny. And he had trust in me. He hasn't done anything like this before, and but people will be surprised because he's a very thoughtful, literate man, and I think people will be surprised. Some people said, "Why do you have Johnny Depp on? It's just a pretty face," and they sell him short. And I think, but for me, it's this fact that you can't separate science and culture. That science is part of our culture, and it does what art, music, and literature do. It causes us to reassess our place in the cosmos. And Johnny, I met because Johnny was a fan of mine, which rather surprised me at the time. My stepdaughter when I told her, who was a big fan of Johnny's, by the way, and when I told her what he'd said, some rather nice things, she said she found it funny that that someone she found amusing but annoying was idolized by someone that she idolized. But Johnny was interested in the things I'd done, and which surprised me. But now I'm not, because I know him. So I think it'll be fascinating to just have a dialogue to explore lots of ideas as well as things about Johnny, and then have the public ask questions. But we'll explore not just the movies, but aspects of the relationship between creativity and madness. He's had great relations with people like Hunter Thompson, and then portrayed him on the screen. So I'm not 100% certain where we're going to go yet. It's a week and a half from now, and I've got a lot of things between now and then. But we're exploring a bunch of possibilities, and we'll see where it goes.
Very excited to see
that.
that.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Do you think science has suffered a PR problem in the last 30 years? And do you think that's kind of, like, it seems like that's reversing a lot lately?
It's reversing. I think it's been the opposite. I think science had a PR problem 30 years ago. I remember when I actually first became chairman of a physics department, was right after this thing called the superconducting super collider was being built at Texas, the largest accelerator in the world, and it was canceled by the U.S., which was an act of stupidity. Congress then seemed stupid, but boy, by comparison to now, they seem brilliant. But I think part of the problem was the scientists had not sold why they wanted to do this, and now I think people are appreciating more the need and the usefulness of scientists who talk to the public. I mean, Carl Sagan had been earlier in some sense, and so I think there's an appreciation for that aspect of what I do. That's not why I do it, but there certainly is a great public interest in science. It's just most members of the public don't realize it's science that they're interested in. That's why when I wrote my book, The Physics of Star Trek, it was one of the reasons I wrote it, because you go to a party and tell people you're a physicist, and they go, well, how about those Yankees or whatever, change the subject. But you talk about time travel or warp drive, and people are fascinated, and that fear goes away, and you can begin to explore things that everyone's fascinated by. And so the Star Trek book did what I really think all teaching is about. It's really seduction. It's not just for teaching, but for radio and for TV or car salesmen. If you want to talk to people, I often tell teachers that the biggest mistake they make is assuming their students are interested in what they have to say, because you've lost them then. You have to explain to them why they should be interested. You have to go to where they are. And Star Trek was that. People were fascinated by Star Trek, but they didn't know they were fascinated by science. But I think more and more people, the fact that I can get 3,000 people to these events, and the fact that lots of people are willing to watch science on TV, in spite of the fact that the media people don't think that. And part of the biggest problem of getting science in the media is that the producers, or not the producers, but the executives, somehow don't think it's interesting. But the public eats it up. And they should, because it's fascinating. Yeah. It's the most interesting stuff that's happening in humanity, so it should be fascinating, and it is. Yeah.
You made the movie The Unbelievers with Richard Dawkins and Werner Herzog a couple of years ago now, and I was just wondering if, in retrospect, now that you look back on that movie, is there things that you learned in that process that surprised you? And did you ever get an answer to that question where you said, well, you asked him a question in the movie, it was like, would you rather explain science or destroy religion? Did you get anywhere on that topic?
Look, Richard and I have spent a lot of time together. One of the reasons the movie was originally happened because, in fact, the two young gentlemen who were director and cinematographer were originally fans, who'd come to lectures of mine and Richard, and had seen that for them it looked like rock concerts. And they're former musicians and also filmmakers. And they wanted to make a rock and roll tour film about science because they'd seen huge crowds, and they wanted to show what it was like behind the scenes. And so we filmed for a long time. And I got to know them because they asked me to do a cameo in a movie they were making, and I was very impressed with the quality of their work. So I actually had them begin to film our Origins events, and they continue to do that. And then they told me what they wanted to do, and I knew Richard and I were having an upcoming tour in Australia, and I said, well, let's consider that. And in a week, I managed to somehow raise that money for it. But that question is one that Richard and I had started talking about 10 years earlier, because we had very different views about how to both interest people in science and attack myth and superstition. And we came at it from different directions. We've come a lot closer over the years, but it's an ongoing dialogue. I don't think there's any real answer because, in some sense, inevitably, exciting people about science does, by and large, help destroy religious myth.
Right.
And there are religious scientists, so there's not a statement that you can't be religious and be a scientist. But you can be a scientist and somehow be a Republican too, so there's no accounting for taste.
There's no theology department at MIT.
As well, and I don't think there should be a theology. I've often said, I taught at Yale and which had a divinity school, but I think theology is the antithesis of scholarship. As I've challenged theologians, and I've never gotten an answer. Give me one example in which theology has contributed to knowledge in the last 500 years. And they always say, the answer they usually give me is, what do you mean by knowledge? Which means they don't have an answer.
Okay. What do they say? The printing press? What do they say?
Yeah. No, I mean, you could ask us any other real field of scholarship, you could find something that's contributed. But theology is not. It's just been circles within circles within circles going around and around, and it's almost obscene, the fact that we treat it with any respect whatsoever. I mean, there's aspects of theology that are useful, but there are aspects of other fields, like the history of religion is fascinating. But that could be done in the history department, and certain philosophy things or philosophical aspects of theology or archaeology. But as a unique discipline, the notion of trying to understand and give meaning to the scriptures as if they have any significance beyond historical documents from the Iron Age or before is ludicrous.
Was there any religious argument or figure that you met during the making of that movie or since that made you at least double take something you had already thought about and said maybe, or was it all pretty much black and white for you?
No, it's not black and white, but generally I've been enlightened by being on the stage with theologians, serious theologians, when I realize how difficult it is for intelligent people, and they are intelligent, to try and make sense of something that doesn't make sense. It's amazing the convoluted paths of logic and inference that they can take to go in these circles. So I find that very enlightening to see how adept people can be at fooling themselves and others if they're intelligent. And I mean, they're honest ones. They're really trying to. The problem is that they assume the answer before they ask the question, and that's the antithesis of science. Right. Because they say, okay, these scriptures are divine. Now let me understand how they can do what they do, and how they can make sense. But that assumption, of course, is an assumption that needs to be tested, and all tests would tell you that they're not. Right. And so the problem they have is assuming a ludicrous conclusion and trying to find a rational route to that ludicrous conclusion.
Could be good for your interview or your conversation with Johnny as far as the science of madness, maybe. Maybe, but there's science. You see, that's the point. And the great thing about science is we can be wrong. That's what really differentiates science from religion. Is being wrong is what progress is all about. Right. I often say, and you may have heard me say, I'm not sure, but that as a theoretical physicist, the two states that are best to be in are wrong and confused. And I'm both a lot of the time. Yeah, and you have a great quote where you talk about, you said lack of comfort means we are on the threshold of new insights. I guess you see that probably personally, and sometimes you see maybe even society.
Well, I think we all should be, if we're in our comfort zone our whole lives, then it's not much of a life, it seems to me. I mean, that's a different way of saying an unexamined life is not worth living. But when I've said the purpose of science is to make us uncomfortable, I don't mean it's a bad thing. It means it's pushing us out of our myopia. And science does it well, but so does all scholarship, so does all learning. It should take us out of the realm of what we thought was common sense and teach us that what we thought was sensible is not always the way the world is. And science forces us to be that way because it's driven by experiment. If it was just driven by theorists, then we'd always sort of come back to things we like. But the universe tells us that it doesn't give a damn about what we like. It is the way it is. And we're driven to that because science is based on empirical evidence. That's what differentiates it from many other areas of human intellectual endeavor, and that's what makes it so successful, because we're kept honest by experiment.
Right. And with cosmology and physics lately, experiments we never thought could ever be performed 30 years ago, now they're happening.
Yeah, things that I never would have thought we would measure when I was a graduate student are happening. I'm amazed. I'm honestly amazed at what's happened over the last 40 years. And the recent discovery of gravitational waves is one example. I mean, the daunting nature of what was required to do those experiments are one reason why I'm not an experimentalist. But
because of the precision required.
Yeah, this precision and the technology couldn't have been done 30 years ago. These waves couldn't have been described. The theoretical predictions couldn't have been done 30 years ago because computers weren't there. This was about as early as we could have detected gravitational waves 100 years after Einstein first proposed their existence, and it's just amazing. And it's a testament to the perseverance and ingenuity of humans who really work hard.
When I heard about that lab in Louisiana,
Yeah.
I was wondering how it didn't get skipped for funding like the Texas Super Collider did, because I was thinking people must have thought, this was a big waste of time for 20 years or waste of money, and then all
a lot
of a
of
sudden,
people did, and I was skeptical about spending $100 million, which is the amount of money at the time. That was still 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the Large Hadron Collider or the Superconducting Super Collider, which was 6 to 10 billion. So maybe it snuck under the radar. 100 million, as what that famous senator, I forget who it was, who said, it's almost real money. But it's still a lot less than an aircraft carrier. Right. But it was questionable, and it was interesting that it was they went to the National Science Foundation, which, in spite of the fact that what many people in the United States think of the National Science Foundation as the major funder of science, it isn't. The major funder of fundamental research has been the Department of Energy, and their budget's much bigger. This was the largest single investment the National Science Foundation had made in any project. And I don't know what politics led to it. I think it was a unique confluence of things. I know the people who were involved, they were fortunate to get that earmarked one way or another. In this case, it was an earmark that was a good thing. But it was not at all clear that it would work. It pushed the limits of the envelope, and still is pushing the limits of the envelope. But that's what makes it so great. So is the Large Hadron Collider. These things, the daunting nature of what's required are such that most people would just give up. And it means that no single individual can do it. In spite of the fact that we honor individuals with prizes, I mean, there are 1,000 scientists on the LIGO collaboration. And there's one in Louisiana and one in Washington. It's important there be 2, right? Because each single one would just get noise. When a truck hits a pothole 30 miles away, it creates a bigger signal than the signal they're looking for. There's 1,000 there. There's probably 10,000 people working at the Large Hadron Collider. Big science is necessary, for better or worse, because it's just too complicated and too difficult for any one group or one individual to do. And just the way it is. If we could do it with smaller amounts of money and smaller groups of people, we would. Because no one likes the fact that they have to take projects that take 40 years to do. Everyone would like to be able to do something in their basement, but it's just not the way it works anymore.
Can we talk physics very quickly?
Sure.
What does this discovery of gravitational waves, what does it really mean to us, if you have to break it down?
Well, it means that it gives us a new window on the universe, because we can now use gravity is the weakest force in nature. It may not seem that way when you wake up in the morning without your coffee, but try and get out of bed. But it is the weakest force, and so to measure anything aspect of gravity is daunting itself. But to use these waves, which are ripples in space, not only just test their existence, but to use them to probe the most exotic objects in the universe, black holes that are colliding, will give us a new window on processes that ultimately are related to the formation of our galaxy, and to maybe even to the nature of the beginning of space and time themselves. So again, they won't address what you might call practical questions, but if we're interested in our own origins, they'll reveal things that will lead us to be able to understand the origin of the Big Bang itself. We don't know what new discoveries are going to come out of it, but every time we open a new window on the universe, we're surprised. And this is a brand new window. It's the astronomy of the 21st century. It's only the first baby step in what will be much more ambitious detectors that will not be 4 miles across, but 4 million miles across in space. It will be a long road, but it will be a road worth taking, I think.
Let's talk about the beginning of the universe.
Sure, why not?
And how
Sounds like
something
it is.
can start from nothing. I know it's a topic that you've addressed before. And
Yeah, I wrote a book about it.
You wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
How can something start from nothing?
Well, of course, it really depends what you mean by nothing, and that's it upsets some people when I say you have to understand what you mean by nothing, and maybe even redefine it. People say, well, you know, you scientists just redefine what you mean by nothing, so you haven't answered the question. But you know, redefining what things mean is called learning. I mean, and so nothing is the absence of something, I would argue. And then you have to understand what something is. And of course, empty space is not even nothing. Empty space, due to the laws of quantum mechanics, is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence due to quantum mechanics and relativity. But the bottom line is, if quantum mechanics governs the nature of gravity at very small scales, then space and time, which are the dynamical variables of gravity, become quantum mechanical objects. And that means they can fluctuate. And that means you can pop whole universes into existence out of nothing. And by universes, I mean space and time that didn't exist before can spontaneously appear. Most of them disappear in a fraction of a second. But under certain conditions, such universes could persist. And if you asked yourself the question, what would be the characteristics of a universe that could live long enough and be large enough for us to evolve in it if it came from nothing? When we've looked out and measured it, what's amazing is those characteristics are precisely the characteristics of the universe we live in. Does that prove it came from nothing? No, but it's highly suggestive. And it's certainly much more reasonable than imagining some figure in deciding it would exist for some purpose that we don't see. And certainly we're just a brief sideshow. Most of the universe is not made of the same stuff that you and I are made of. 70% of the energy in the universe resides in empty space itself. If I take space and I get rid of all the particles and radiation, it weighs something. We don't understand why. I proposed it did a while ago.
You proposed this a long time ago, didn't you?
Yeah, in 1995, and then it was discovered in 1998. But then that's 70%. 30% is made of particles that are probably different than any of the particles in this room. In fact, they're probably streaming through this room right now, and through you and me. We're building devices to try and measure them, another area I'm interested in. Only 1% is everything we see. You could get rid of all the stars and galaxies and everything we see in the universe, and it would be essentially the same. We're a little bit of cosmic pollution in a sea of dark matter and dark energy. So to argue that the universe is somehow made for us is kind of so ridiculous as to in some sense not be worth discussing. But this possibility that through quantum mechanics, it seems like a miracle that you could end up with a universe with 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars. It seems to violate the laws of physics. How do you start from nothing and end up with all this stuff? Turns out when you include gravity, the energy of the universe can be zero. There's positive energy in matter and negative energy due to gravity. You add it up, the total energy of the universe could be zero, and then it doesn't seem so crazy that you could create it from nothing. And so it's plausible. The biggest miracle seemed to be creating stuff from no stuff. But it turns out that's not a miracle at all, and we can do that in physics all the time. And to me, that's worth celebrating. And that's partly what I wrote my last book about.
The Higgs discovery, how does that change things? And how did that affect your mindset, and where does that take us from
Well,
there?
it affected my mindset because I really didn't believe the Higgs existed, because it just seemed like too slippery a solution to a big, deep problem. I thought nature would be more inventive. But it just changed everything. In fact, my new book is more or less about that in a general context of the greatest intellectual journey that humans have ever taken. But what it really tells us, the Higgs tells us that the universe we see is even more of an accident than we thought. If this background invisible field hadn't settled into the configuration it has, like water freezing in a certain configuration on a window, then we wouldn't be here. If it had changed, if it had frozen, if it settled in any other configuration, then the particles that make you and I up wouldn't have mass. So the mass we have is an illusion. It turns out it's only there because there's this background Higgs field that all the particles are interacting with. So it tells us there's a hidden reality underneath our existence, which is fascinating and maybe even simpler than the reality we see. But it also tells us that we're a cosmic accident, and it also tells us that we may be ephemeral, that this Higgs field could change its nature and then everything we see may disappear. So once again, we're not the ultimate purpose of creation. We could just be a momentary sideshow. And again, I find that energizing, the fact that our cosmic insignificance I find very motivating, because it makes every moment I'm here more precious.
So it should excite people, not make them feel
it should,
overhumbled.
and if presented properly, I hope it does. But some people would rather imagine that there's eternal life somewhere and makes them happier. Why, I don't know. Who would want to live forever? I mean, forever is a long time. As Woody Allen said, eternity is a long time, especially near the end. And it's a lot different than a long time. So eternity with your friends, it might be acceptable. With your in-laws, come on.
Why jump into the religious argument? Your plate is full and poureth over with all the stuff you do with science.
Because I think I jump into it because I like to provoke people into thinking about why they think about what they think about, and also because religion gets in the way. It gets in the way of a lot of progress, and I think therefore, ultimately, even I don't really care what people believe. I care what they do, but your beliefs influence your actions, and therefore, ultimately, a believing myth and superstition ultimately leads you to irrational actions one way or another. And so I think it's important that the world as it is fascinating enough. We don't have to create all the nonsense around it. So, my purpose is to get people excited about the universe. My purpose isn't to destroy people's religions, to get back to that question of Richard. But part of accepting the beauty of the universe is being willing to accept the universe for the way it is opening your mind to that. And if I have to open people's minds sometimes by provoking them to think about what they had accepted or their parents told them to accept when they were too young to really think about it, then that's a good thing, because I've already said teaching children religion is child abuse, because they're too young. These are really deep concepts. So exposing them and telling them what to believe before they can really think about it is really unfortunate. As parents, we all have done that to some extent in our children. Really, we should be encouraging them to ask questions and be willing to say, I don't know, when they ask them. But religion is an institutionalized form of that.
I had Zoltan Istvan here, who ran for president with the Transhumanist Party, and he said, Brian, I'm the only atheist who's ever run for political office, for presidential office. And I was like, what? And he's like, everyone else was always affiliated with a religion. And it just made me think, I live in the UK now, but religion is highly entwined into politics into America, right?
Oh, yeah.
Into so many other things. Do you find that America is hard to separate religion from the rest of its daily life, more so than here in the UK or Europe?
Well, I think more so than the UK, although it happens here too, especially with fundamentalism and especially with Islamic fundamentalism rising in the UK. But it is unfortunate, and I just wrote a piece for the New Yorker on this, but it's unfortunate that recently in a Pew poll that people were asked what characteristics would make you likely or unlikely to vote for someone in office, and you could take all these factors, inexperience, financial impropriety, sexual impropriety, even now being a Muslim, all of them fall above atheism. The most negative characteristic for the American public for a presidential candidate is atheism, which really is what upsets me, because a religion has appropriated morality, so that lack of religion is now equated with lack of morality, with not being good. And most people who say they're religious don't believe the nonsense. They claim to be religious because it makes them feel good about themselves. And we have to just convince people it's okay to ask questions. I get letters every day from people around the world who tell me, I now realize I always ask questions, and I felt I was a bad person for asking questions. People should realize they're not a bad person for asking questions. In fact, nothing should be sacred. Everything should be open to question. The very idea of sacred is a bad thing.
Right. We associate in religion with morality, when in fact it doesn't mean that.
No, in fact, if you took it literally, it's immorality.
Right.
If you look at the actual biblical texts, all of them are full of vicious violence, misogyny, genocide. They're not moral guides, no matter what people say, and that includes the New Testament as well as all the rest.
I remember reading Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, and he said something about how, you know, if he was confronted by a group of men on the street, whether he'd want them to be coming from a religious ceremony or not. And he made this whole argument about how he'd rather it not be, because his safety would be in jeopardy more so. And he talked about all these cities, which I think started with the letter B, but that he's been to all around the world, and his argument from there, and it was very fascinating.
Well, it is. I mean, and it's really an example of the kind of propaganda and the kind of brainwashing that occurs, so that people naturally think that religion is a good thing. And it's been very effective because it's been around for a long time in different versions in all human societies that we know of. And it's certainly been institutionalized as a power structure for at least a few thousand years. And therefore, you know, you get them young, right? You get them while they're young. And so part of I wrote a piece on you know, religion is only one generation away from being gone. Just like, you know, if you look at gay rights movement in the United States, a generation ago it would have seemed impossible. But what happened was the young people realized they all know people who are gay or families that are. And if you ask people 16 or younger, they don't understand what the issue is.
Right.
It may be being debated by old white men in the Senate and in robes in courts, but it's a done deal. The next generation has said they don't understand what the whole problem is. And so educating young people to think for themselves is really the point. Richard and I were asked, I think in Australia at one event, you know, a big event, you know, how do you get people to follow you? And we both said the same thing. We don't want people to follow us. We just want people to think for themselves.
To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to londonrealacademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media, log in and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at londonrealacademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there, and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
There's a huge hole that he's left. And I'm going to do whatever I can to try and